With this, I am very happy that Dr. Sriram Rajgopal has joined us today, the president of Agile Training Champions USA. Sir, welcome to this webinar. I'm really grateful to you for joining us for this particular program. I know it is early morning in US. It's around 12:30 or so, and I understand that you have come for a mock session also earlier, a little bit earlier. So thank you for taking your time and being with us today. And I appreciate really your commitment to share your knowledge across the borders, though it is late night in the US. Thank you. And I wish all the participants to sit back, relax, reflect, and respond by taking necessary actions and educating our students and writing research projects. With that, I wish you all the very best. Stay home, stay safe, and take care of your family. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Renuka.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. P. Chitra, Head Department of Biochemistry, will give the introductory remarks of the resource person, Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning. I extend a warm welcome to all the participants and a special welcome to the resource person, Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, for the second session of the webinar series, Bioscience for Enriching Human Life. With immense pleasure, I would like to introduce Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, President of Agile Training Champions, Enterprise Agile Evangelist, Andover, USA. Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan graduated with a bachelor's degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering from the University of Madras, master's degree in computer engineering from Wayne State University, Michigan, MBA degree in management from Concordia University, Wisconsin, and PhD degree in organization and management from Capella University, Minnesota. He holds around 20 professional certifications in project management. Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan has an extensive experience in software development, project, and program management in many industries. He offers training courses and certification preparation courses, delivers information technology and management courses, serves as adjunct faculty in universities and community colleges, in addition to delivering his own project and agile training. Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan has held the position of Vice President of Operational Excellence and Training, Vice President of Proportion Delivery, and Vice President of Program Management Office at Aptus Health. He has delivered numerous projects for clients in pharma companies, airways, and several other concerns. He was selected as one of the finalists for Kerzner Award for Process Excellence in 2012 and also the recipient of Eric Janet PMI Excellence Award in 2017. To his credit, he has also several publications in peer-reviewed scholarly journals, Scrum articles, and PM Network. He also volunteers with PMI Mars Bay Chapter, Agile Alliance, and NAB, served as Director of Speakers Bureau and VP, Marketing and Communication role, and also in the capacity of the board member. Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, a person with an ocean of knowledge and a wide array of skill sets, is here to present a webinar on the topic Role of Project Management in Drug Development Process. Over to Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chitra, and everyone for a very warm welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity that I have been given at this point from Sri Ramakrishna College of Arts and Science for Women. It is my honor and privilege to be presenting at this particular point in time the role of project management in drug development. And I was given the opportunity to be introduced at this point here already, so I'm not going to spend too much of my time here. Pretty much everything in this one particular slide was already covered. Important point here to note is that I bring a scholar practitioner approach where I try to bring both the theory and the practice and try to reinvent the whole cycle. And that's what I'm really passionate about in the role that I'm going to be talking about as project management capacity within the drug development life cycle. So oftentimes people ask this question. We are in a scientific profession of drug development, biopharmaceutical, and what is a project manager going to do here? So many times this question keeps coming up. We are talking more about a chemical scientist kind of a role, and we don't need any management personality over here in terms of getting the work done. We know how to get things done. I would like to start with a simple story. Oftentimes when we step outside of the context in which we are operating, it sheds the story a lot better. Recently, there was a movie that came up that talked about Ford versus Ferrari. And the fundamental theme behind that story is that there was an engineer, Ken Miles, in that movie, who was supposed to be developing a Ford GT40 machine that is supposed to be a race car and commercialize that. Great engineer, wonderful person. But that person was not able to actually make that commercial vehicle available for a larger audience. And that person needed the support of another individual who was also an engineer, but also a manager. And that person is Carol Shelby. And he worked not only with the engineer, but also with huge management stakeholders like Henry Ford, and tried to make this whole thing come together. And that's not all. He was continuously managing expectations around funding, payment, planning of the events, motivating every team members that was contributing to that whole initiative, and bringing everything together as a holistic whole. And without that individual, regardless of how much capacity one single scientific profession had, we will not be able to succeed in this particular endeavor, right? So I want to set the context so that we are able to see this. And the bioscientist members that we are focusing on are more like those engineers who have that knowledge, who have that drive, who have that action to make things happen. But at the end of the day, this drug has to go through this entire roadmap of commercialization and get into the hands of the consumers through HCPs or healthcare providers. If that's not happening, the drug that we are actually developing, regardless of how potent it is, it's not going to reap the benefits. And so I want to set the context in terms of how we see things. So the stages of drug development, when you look at this, there are 4 critical stages. And the first one starts with a preclinical trial, which we all know. And then we move into the clinical trials. And then we get into some of those drug approval processes. And then we move into the post-approval assessment in terms of whether we are reaping the benefits that we originally thought we will have. So when you look at these 4 important stages, there are a number of things that have to be kept in mind. When you look at this, each stage is loaded with uncertainty. Uncertainty is all about risk. Experimentation in each and every one of those stages requires a measurable objective, the end goal that we need to see accomplished. As part of each and every one of those, there is a cost considerations in every stage. How much does it cost to actually develop a drug? How much does it cost to actually get this from one stage to another stage? Management, as a result, has several success criteria as part of the entry and exit. We call them milestones, checkpoints. Different kinds of people are getting engaged at different points in time. We don't want to engage people too early. We don't want to engage people too late. And we need to engage all of those members at the right time. As a result, we also have to manage through this entire legal and regulatory complex roadmap. Without each one of these things, you are never going to actually get the things done. So the question should not be what kind of a project manager we need, but what type of competencies we really need in a project manager. And frequently, we don't invest a project manager. We don't invest in the competencies required for our project managers. We try to make a senior scientist or a biochemist or pharmacologist into this particular project management role, and we set them up for failure because the competencies expected for project manager are never actually taught in any of the schools in a scientific instruction. And when we actually move into a corporate world in the practitioner setting, we expect that to be somehow kind of understood, but we don't have the techniques, the tools, the tips that we have to actually understand. As a result, I'm moving this stage into the next level. So when you look at the drug development itself, there are a lot of different stakeholder groups that we have to bring. Hundreds and several thousands of internal as well as external group members have to be brought in at appropriate period in time. So engaging the right stakeholder at the right time with the right level of context is critical. You talk too early, too much, people are going to miss it. You talk too late with the right information, it's already late in the game. Neither of them is acceptable. So you need to understand the impact. The estimated cost as it stands now for a drug from its inception to enter the market is about 2.6 billion US dollar. And this excludes the actual manufacturing cost on a large scale of that particular drug and make it available in a healthcare setting. That's a lot of money. How are we going to actually manage this initiative from beginning till end? We need somebody who's able to manage that. So evaluating the opportunity cost of working in one drug versus another, the amount of time that we will be spending in some other drug that produces a much more benefit and outcome should not be compromised because somebody is interested in developing one particular drug, right? So what are the success and exit criteria needs to be completely understood. And the timeline, how long can you actually spend? It takes approximately 12 years, according to a lot of different data points, for a drug to actually enter into the market, along with this $2.6 billion worth of investment, excluding the full supply chain logistics on manufacturing on a large scale and making it available to the HCPs and to all the pharmacists. Who is managing that actual impact of the timeline? We need to understand that. And when you look at this, science can focus on safety, efficacy claims, but stability and sustainability of the drug is also important. And if that is not necessarily completely understood from an uncertainty standpoint, we're going to miss it. Finally, risk. As I mentioned, every stage is loaded with uncertainty. Uncertainty in project management terms is risk. And there are a lot of different ways of identifying, analyzing, managing, and addressing risks. And while every stage of drug development has risks that we address by using proper quality control and quality assurance mechanisms, about 12% of the drugs actually enter the clinical trials, which is the second stage from preclinical to the clinical stage. So there is a lot more involved over here. When do you actually balance both the efficacy and the claims? We need to actually have some mechanism to manage this initiative during this drug development life cycle. If we don't, we spend more time, we spend more of our organizational resources, and we are not managing the stakeholder pools appropriately. These are the reasons why we are seeing almost 80 to 85% of the drugs not necessarily making it to the actual stage 2. So what can we do about this? So uncontrolled science in an unregulated market is a recipe for disaster. It's just accidents waiting to happen. And we have seen this too often, too many times. How much have we learned from all these projects that have happened across all the pharmaceutical industry space throughout the world? Thalidomide. This was given several decades back for treating morning sickness for pregnant women. An unregulated market. This was in 1950s and 1960s time frame. So unregulated market. So we actually moved forward with not enough actual controlled studies and controlled experiments, and we moved too quickly to the market. As a result, we suffered. There were a lot of babies that were born instead of having limbs, they were born with fissures. And some of this generation still exists. So have we learned completely all the different things? Yes, to some extent, no, to a large extent, right? So when you look at these things, compliance came up as a result of these things. Thalidomide was one of the foundational drugs where all these problems started coming in, and so we created a lot of different checks and balances. But the good thing about standard is that we have one. The bad thing about standard is that we have too many. So there are so many different abbreviations that keep coming up. Investigational new drug, a new drug application process, MLR that stands for Medical, Legal and Regulatory Board, PRT that stands for Promotional Review Team, and then Promotional Review Committee. Who are they? What are their roles? What do they do? What is their delegation authority? If we don't understand all these things, we are getting lost. And no one is properly getting trained on these things. They are only focusing on the science aspects of it, or not the management of science aspects of it. So that's very critical. So when we look at the roadmap for drug development, we have a number of different things that we have to understand. So the first one is going to be the preclinical trial. It takes up to 3 to 4 years before we actually are ready with the preclinical trials that basically says, okay, I have a new compound that I have understood, or a molecule that I have created. It has these kind of potential benefit. We have tested it on animals, and then we are moving forward. But the focus of these stages is going to be on pharmacology and toxicology. After these two things are completely done, we are able to move forward to what is called an IND submission, which is an investigational new drug. The goal of that IND submission is to be able to move to the second stage which is going to be the first in human, first in man, with the first human dose. We want to be able to say we are now ready to move forward to the next stage where we can actually test this on human beings. That's our IND submission. And then we move into the second stage. But how many of those drugs actually make it to the second stage? It's only about 12%. Only 12% of all these ideas that we actually experiment for 3 to 4 years is actually making it to the next stage. We can control that by having management scientists. The next one is going to be the clinical trials. Now, the goal is actually to perform a number of different types of testing and actually get them to the second stage, which is going to be the NDA or the BLA, which is going to be the new drug application or biologics license application. That is the process. The goal is to get over there. And at the end of that, we are moving forward to the next stage. But how many of these things that go into the clinical style actually go past the clinical trial stage and then move into stage 3? That's only about 8.5% of those drugs that actually make it to that level. So we have that funnel that we are building. Of all these things, only 12% make it, and out of the 12%, only 8.75% of them are making it. And now we are actually coming up with all the different things that we have to have ready to move it to the next stage, which is going to be the OPDP, the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion Protocol. Then we are looking at what are the promotional materials that we really have to develop so that the healthcare organization, healthcare providers, the consumers, all those other people that we really have to prescribe those medicines, understand them, those members that are going to take those medicines, the patients who understand those things, are to be properly prepared. And if these things are not prepared, the thought process began what are required for us to get them ready into the stage 3. At the time stage 2 is complete, we are not going to actually gain all the first movers advantage that we had, the early movers advantage that we had. So the competitive advantage they originally thought we had is actually replaced by disadvantage, right? So we really have to think about the whole process and get ourselves ready. Instead of looking at it just from a medical side of the equation, if we look at this from a business side, the basic research should start looking at the market research, not just a molecular compound that we really want to go forward with. That is definitely required, but then have to be augmented and supplemented by what is the market, who would use it, what kind of a product potential do we have, and that also has to be thought. As a result of that, we move into the clinical stage where we are looking at potential development, the appropriate benefits that comes with that, what kind of targeted population will benefit from this, what kind of risk mitigation plans that we really have to have, and as part of that, a marketing strategy. If our drug gets approved, how do we move forward? All the time, when you look at all these numbers, what happens is we're spending all our time on this R&D, the research and development, but there is a 85% failure rate. As a result, we don't put together the marketing strategy because we are thinking of this is not going to make it through. As a result, we don't need to put these things together. But if it suddenly makes it through because of all our work ethics and all our contribution to that particular effort, we are stuck with the regulatory approval process because we don't have the proper documentation, we don't have the proper protocols followed, and regulatory approval stalls. Right there, we are looking at labeling strategy, we are looking at appropriate filing and sampling strategy, we are looking at the launch plan, we are looking at positioning of how to do this in the market. All those things have to be thought through along with the clinical studies as we are moving forward, because at the end of the clinical studies, you are getting ready for actual the NDA application. At that time, regulatory approval comes and asks for all these kind of documents. And as we are getting everything ready, we are actually positioning them for product launch, which means your strategy around pricing, strategy around proper promotion, what kind of channels you will promote, how much money you will spend on each and every one of those channels. The entire campaign needs to be monitored. But these things are not an afterthought. Just like quality by design, qualities are not an accident. These are not an afterthought. We need to think them much in advance. And then we move to post-campaign monitoring and make our adjustment in terms of what is happening in the market, what kind of adverse events are happening, and then we try to adjust them as part of our phase 4 trials later. This is the business side of the equation when you look at it. Now let's put the project management lifecycle spin here. When you look at this, an idea comes up. Right from the idea, we are looking at an ROI, return on investment, which is this the right drug? Why? What's the business need? What will happen if you don't develop this? So you are looking at the project selection criteria at this point into how to move forward. Once you have done that, you are moving into the skills assessment. The skills assessment goes into two different angles. One is going to be the people, and the other one is going to be the non-people resources, which includes the facilities, the equipments, the materials, the infrastructure, and all the supplies. If any one of them is contaminated, we don't have things that we need to actually do the right experiments, or our experiments are not necessarily conclusive of what we want to accomplish. So we need to make sure that we have considerations for each and every one of those things. And then we are moving into the project kickoff. That's when you are looking at all these multiple stages, the preclinical, the clinical, and phase 1, phase 2, and all those things we are looking at that particular point in time. As a result of that, we move into progressive planning. Limited amount of planning with limited amount of information, but we are moving them in cycles, preparing for all these documents and all these processes that I mentioned about. When you are doing this progressive planning, you are going into two different aspects. What do we have to do to continuously improve? At the same time, what do we have to monitor and control? These two things will start merging into a product launch. And as part of the product launch, we are looking at operational excellence. How do you make sure that these are all delivering benefits that we are expecting to see in the actual market? As part of these two endeavors, you are looking at health checks and training and closures appropriately. And these elements will actually lead into what is called continuous skill building, continuous improvement process, continuous operational excellence, continuous training, and as the product actually gets out of its growth cycle, we retire these products. This is the entire project management life cycle. So these things are all lined up. The entire medical drug development life cycle is aligned with the business life cycle, is aligned with the project management life cycle. But we don't align all these things and get the appropriate right people at the right time in the right place, we are not going to actually necessarily reap the benefits that we think we want. So what are some of those core competencies in project management? There are 10 different knowledge areas that project management talks about. Very high level. Integration management is focusing on change. Change is the order of the day. It's only constant. And when you look at 12 years of life cycle to actually develop a drug, we're not going to always say this is exactly how it's going to be for the next 12 years. We can't predict what comes in the next 1 week. So how can we predict for the entire 12 years? So we really have to have a constant change management life cycle. And then we have to have scope. And as part of the scope for each and every one of those stages that we talked about, we have to put together the appropriate, reasonably acceptable schedule. And then we have to associate the capital expenses and operating expenses. And then we have to constantly manage the quality. So those three elements, the scope, schedule, cost, becomes the triple constraints, the minimum that we need to be managing that. And then we have to ensure the appropriate quality controls are in place. And then we are managing different types of stakeholders as we are entering different phases. What kind of procurement we have to do, the suppliers, the consultants, the vendors, and all those members. Throughout all these phases, we have multiple types of risk. It could be business risk, resource risk, stakeholder risk, cost risk, inflation risk, so many different things. And then the communication management of how you keep everybody engaged, and then the actual team that is actually delivering the work. So all these things are really important as part of the project management knowledge areas. If any one of these things are not there, if you don't have a project manager that is balancing both the strategy and execution, how will the world look like? That's almost telling like every drug that we ever develop will always work for everybody, like a utopian world, right? It's like a fairy tale story, and there is no magic. In order for us to bring the magic, we need to bring that balance to view, right? I hope I get everybody's attention in terms of the role that a project manager plays over here. So the project manager role happens in three different stages. We talked about those three different stages already, the roadmap, and I'm going to start talking about what does the project manager provide in each and every one of those roles. So at a minimum in the preclinical stage, the project manager is becoming a consultative person. That consultative role will be looking at multiple compliance, multiple regulations, multiple business, multiple vendors, and bring all these members together to see how do we move forward. This is just the new NCE development to the time the IND submission happens, right? As we are moving into the second stage of clinical trials, the project manager role becomes a lot more involved, engaging more stakeholders, more regulatory agencies, managing triple constraints, which is the scope, schedule, and cost. In addition, you are looking at risks, because risk could encompass a lot of different other areas. And then because of all these different risks and stakeholders that you have to manage communication at a completely different scale. It's not putting a status report together. It's much more than that. Then you are moving into the third stage, which is taking a drug that is almost getting approved, getting all the related materials that needs to be also at the same time approved at the same time as the drug, and then getting it ready and positioning it ready for the market, which is involving all the different 10 knowledge areas I talked about, managing multiple integrated campaigns, getting all the promotional materials revised and approved appropriately, monitoring the market for adverse event, and tracking the appropriate spends and honoraria that the HCP is actually provided with, so that there is no inappropriate influencing behaviors. All these things are properly required of a project manager. So as you can see, the skill set is getting more and more and more. No wonder we are really requiring biopharmaceutical project manager that requires a lot more important skill sets and competencies in the work. So when you take a stage one, the preclinical trial, this is more like project manager providing the basic life support. Science is critical here. But then somebody needs to actually work with all the different scientists to say the end goal is the cost-effective IND submission. Right? What is cost-effective? We need to make sure that we understand that. At what point enough is enough? We need to understand that. Right? If you don't, we spend up too much time, and that much amount of money that should have been spent on some other endeavor is lost. So the consultative role gives you at least a minimum of three important things. One is going to be structuring the study. What are some of the lessons that we have learned, not just from our company, not from within our business unit, but across the industry, across the actual pharmaceutical space? What regulations are coming? What kind of warning letters have been issued by other people for other companies' drugs in similar disease state? So we need to get all these things and then bring into the CMC process, the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls processes. Because without that, the structure of the study itself is not necessarily ready. When you look at a study, the data collection elements are all very important. What kind of data you collect, how you collect, when you collect, and if you study, all those things are pretty important. And that gets us into the process discipline. How do you champion and establish the appropriate general practices? And the GXP is going to be spread across multiple areas. The general lab practices that we should follow, the general manufacturing process that we should follow, the general clinical practice, and the general documentation practice. Any one of these things, if we are missing up, we are actually delaying the regulatory process. If we delay the regulatory process, the beautiful drug that we are creating, the wonderful drug that we are creating is not able to actually reach the hands of the patient. Then comes the stakeholder management. Different people are getting involved, and so how do you engage different people? So you need to have the project manager who is able to set up the project office with appropriate controls in place, templates and process guidance in place to ensure that the project team is supported and the project management team is engaged. If this consultative role is not present at the initial stages, we are starting with the wrong foot. So what are some of those JAP that I talked about over there? And the most important thing of the preclinical studies is to make sure that we are able to get into the clinical studies, which means in order for us to test them on humans, all these important things like the safety, toxicity, pharmacokinetics, and the metabolism in human beings have to be understood. That is a legal mandate, which basically says the primary organ toxicity is totally understood from a MOA, mechanism of action perspective, right? How it metabolizes and reaches the brain, kidneys, lungs, and hearts, and all those important organs and similar organ issues and things like that. We need to understand that if you're not able to do that, we are never entering the clinical stage 2. And that is coming primarily from two important areas. One is going to be GLP. Now, how consistently you are following the uniform practices and reliability you are reproducing these results, the quality and the integrity of your data sets, and all these things are really important from a GLP standpoint, right? Where are we talking about these things? The next one is from a GMP standpoint, looking at how we are adhering to the industry standard guidelines. What are some of those qualities of production? How are we stabilizing these processes and control variation that happens? And how do we still ensure the sustainability within the safety guidelines and still meeting those integrity elements, including and not limited to ethics? right? When you look at all these different things, we need a person that has a balance of both business and still detail orientation, right? We need that individual. If we don't have that individual, we are not going to actually set up the study for success, and then we go and submit everything and we don't have the right documentation, and now we are waiting and waiting and waiting, and we are losing the competitive edge. So when you're looking at the stakeholders, as you are entering the stage, you need to look at three important areas. That is going to be the power, the authority that particular stakeholder has, either by organizational hierarchy or the titles within the industry, and the influence, the ability to actually introduce a behavioral change in others, and the concern that we can actually demonstrate to other people, empathetic, emotional and cultural intelligence, those things. When you bridge all these things, there are three things that a stakeholder really requires, and these are the needs, the expectation, and the wants. What do they absolutely need that needs to be must met? And the next one is going to be, what are some of those expectations that somehow should be met but not necessarily highest priority? And what are some of those additional wants? If we have more time, if we have more energy, if we have more money, we will be able to meet those things. So the needs, expectation, and want should be prioritized based upon the must to do, should to do, and the could to do. And sometimes we have to do or want to do. What are we going to stop doing? All these things have to be understood. If you don't put this proper balance in structure, then we are going to yield to everything that everybody asks, and we will never be able to do anything that we want to do. So what are some of the major competencies the project manager is producing in stage one? First, they are championing scope towards the progress. When they are doing that, they are managing scope as well as planning constantly for risk. And as they are moving into the next one, they are leading factual decision making because they are helping you with the good practices. They are helping you with the study structure. So they are doing statistical data analysis. And then they are actually bringing the scope and schedule. So whether you are using artificial intelligence to do this, machine learning to do this, or whatever that protocol is, you are still actually using these from basic descriptive data statistics all the way to the prescriptive statistics. Then into the third stage, they are managing more and more stakeholders. When they are doing this, they are controlling procurement and resources and cross collaboration across different stakeholder groups. So these are at a minimum the project manager competencies, the roles and responsibilities that somebody is doing. And this is everything to do with how you manage science, more like management scientists. So now we are moving into the stage two. The stage two is more like not just essential life support, but it's much more than that. We are now looking at project and program management. One of the things about program management is looking at multiple related projects along with production capacity. That's what program management in a small nutshell means. But there are a lot of different projects that are coming into play at this point as you are moving into the clinical stage. Identifying target population, identifying the volunteers, identifying control studies, and doing multiple studies, and so many different things are coming up. But the goal as a result of that is only one: facilitate a timely NDA or a BLA submission. That's your goal. In order to hit that goal, you are doing 20 other projects and making sure that all of them are interrelated. In each dependency among projects themselves are a project that needs to be managed. So under the stage two, we are looking at three phases. The first phase is going to be usually involving healthy volunteers who are able to actually support our project by taking the doses. The second phase is going to be a control study of anonymous volunteers that we are actually studying with a test and control group. And then the third phase is going to be expanding it much more further to a large population to actually prove the validity that this is working on a large population and not on a small controlled population alone. All along, what you are trying to do is, am I actually ensuring the safety and efficacy consistently? That's all you are constantly trying to increase more and more and more data points to say this drug will work effectively in all the different populations that I have studied, and here are the data points to ensure the safety and efficacy claims are actually managed. That's your goal to facilitate towards your NDA process. So here, you're moving from just those three important skills to 7 out of the 70% of these knowledge areas. And what are they? When you look at them, you are looking at schedule, which I talked about. You're looking at more cost, funding, and payments. and you are looking at more types of resources, which includes both people and non-people resources across all those GX processes. You are looking at additional quality assurance and quality protocols, including but not limited to Lean and Six Sigma. You are looking at scope control because change is constantly evolving. So you need to put together the appropriate change control mechanisms to manage the change. Risk is now taking on a new definition because more and more business risks are coming up, schedule risks are coming up, innovation risks are coming up, and the stakeholders that you are going to manage across a lot of different stakeholder groups. So we are now touching more. So the project manager in stage 2 is a lot more involved, and that's not it. This particular person brings 6 best friends, and these 6 best friends are primarily the what, the why, the who, the when, the where, and the how. They call them 5W and 1H. These are the 6 best friends. What are the specific things about climb and efficacy and effectiveness that you have to talk about in your drug? Why are these the minimal requirement? And what kind of people are we dealing with? Not just the targeted population who will consume it, but also the people that will get them approved to the next phase. And what timeline are we looking at, and what kind of risks are the people having, the stakeholder appetites at this point, the place and time of review, and then a game plan, an agenda with a game plan to say these are the expected review criteria. We have met all these review criteria. As a result, we are moving forward with an approval process. These things have to be constantly in place. See, planning is very essential, even though plans are not. But if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. So the progressive elaboration mindset keeps coming up. What is the progressive elaboration mindset as part of stage 2 approval process in the drug development is concerned? Normally, in the project management approach, we talk about the plan, do, check, act, the PDCA, which is very commonly known, introduced by Deming in 1950s or so. This is a very common one. Even in some of those agile concepts, we talk about this. And that is similarly applied in a stage 2 application process. We call it issue, rule, analysis, and conclude. Right? This is the process. But what is this issue, rule, analysis, and conclude mean? So what is the claim, and what claim will be actually disputed by the regulators and the standards, and what kind of standards can I apply to make sure that I am holding on to my validity claims here, and what empirical evidence am I able to a document from my studies to make sure that I'm meeting these requirements. And as a result of all my empirical studies, how am I articulating my conclusion very clearly? This is something that is really required. It's not just science alone. Collecting all the different science and putting together in terms of how do I get them through the review process. It's all about how you manage the stakeholders through this process. And this is one of the top 10 commandments of how you drug approve, and which we have talked about a number of times in a number of different places. And this is very similar to how you manage through projects. So we need to sow the success seeds all the time. Now, how do you sow the success seeds throughout this process? There are 5 critical steps. What are the statutory laws that apply in the context of the drug that I'm developing? What regulations within different countries and different regions that really apply? And what are some of those prior rulings that has happened in the similar disease state that basically give us some leeway or to not provide a leeway? And what industry standards exist that we really have to understand and comply with? And what are some of those corporate policies within our company that we have to understand? So from the macroscopic to the microscopic, we need to understand these things. And if we don't understand these things as part of our stage 1 and stage 2, we are not sowing the success seeds. And how will we not sow the success seeds over here? You are actually unclear scope, poor data analysis, inadequate acceptance criteria. All these things could have been properly avoided. So you are looking at all these things, putting a checks and balance and say, all right, we cannot do all these things. And you are addressing insufficient product risk, right? You are ensuring proper safety and claim correlation. You are also avoiding unnecessary poor structures and presentation that will actually not necessarily help the regulators see the light at the end of the tunnel, following that IRAC process that we just talked about. So you have to do all these things. If you don't do all these things properly, I'm not sowing the success seeds. We are intentionally delaying the drug that has potential merit to reach the actual market. So we have to prepare for this uncertainty. Uncertainty is the risk that I mentioned before. So it's very easy to hold the helm when the sea is calm, right? But when turbulent waters, when turbulent seas are coming up, how do you actually manage yourself? Because things are not going to go the happy path scenario all the time. Things are going to hit the road. And how do you manage them at that point? That's when you really have to do this negotiate, prioritize, triage, and resolve. But you need to predict these things in happen. You're not going to be reactive, but you're going to be very proactive. So you need to separate the people from the problem. You also have to have the proper partner that we talk about, the best alternatives to negotiating agreement. Like, what am I going to give away? What are the non-negotiables? That needs to be understood. So your focus should be on the interest and not on the position from where you are coming from. As a result, you have to generate a variety of options for every one of those things that somebody else will dispute, telling like, oh, I don't agree with this, I don't relate to this. What are the options that you have available for your data points? As a result, you are working towards a result. In the end, the result is going to be the drug approved, and it's in the hands of the HCP prescribed, and somebody is actually adhering to the dosage, and they are getting benefit. Right? If those things are not met, we are not going to actually resolve the problem. So you need to go back to the table and say, how do I negotiate? How do I prioritize? How do I triage? How do I resolve issues? And the best thing is to understand more about these elements. You have to start with the end in mind. What's my non-negotiable alternative agreement philosophy? And then you have to avoid the agreement trap, getting too quickly into agreeing something and then not necessarily seeing the full benefit that you would have actually received. What are some of those agreement traps that others will push you into? And between both of things, you get into what is called a ZOPA, which is a zone of potential agreement that all of you are happy with. You need to understand these elements much in advance before you start going to a regulatory approval process. If these things are not understood, you just move in and you yield to whatever the terms and conditions are, and it takes its own path. So combining these two ideas over here, sowing the success seeds and preparing for uncertainty, you are setting yourself for the stage 3. Remember I said, at the time the stage 2 approval is done, that is your new drug is getting approved, you also have to make sure that you know the channel, you know the promotional materials, you know how it's going to be promoted, when it is going to be promoted, the entire campaign management concept has to be there. At that point in time, if you're coming and thinking, let me now start putting all these things together, then you are delaying the release of the launch plan, which is not good. It's not just the approval of the drug, it's also the launch of the drug to the market. So what are some of those important things that you have to keep in balance at this point? So at a minimum, when you are doing your stage 2 approval, you need to set the stage 3 for success by doing all these things. Have I got all the prescribing information completely ready? Have I got my risk profile completely understood to see whether this will eventually become a black box product, right? Whether do I have proper ISI information, and when would I actually need to have proper selected safety information so that I am able to establish the fair balance in the marketing materials I will create. And what is some of the medication guide, which is going to be things that a consumer will actually see in non-medical terms. So when you look at these things, look into the prescribing information in more depth. What is my indication? What is this absolutely indicated for? And what are some of those contraindications where it should not be used? We are talking today, the hydroxychloroquine, how that should be used or that should not be used, and all those things. These are all, things that we are not meant to be used for. And precautions, places where the doctor should be careful in prescribing to certain kinds of patients or certain demographics of patients. Side effects that needs to be completely understood. Specific amounts of the dosage, which is what is leading into the substance abuse problem that we are all facing these days, and how it is going to be absorbed in our body, right? The clinical studies that we really have to use to understand these things from a subsequent analysis perspective. All these things have to be completely understood, because if the prescribing information is not clear, stage 3 is not going to move forward. So that's going to get stopped. So think ahead for the promotions. When you are putting your stage 2 approval process together, you have to think, if my drug gets approved, how will I get my launch plan moving forward? So you have to start thinking about all these elements that I talked about. And then the black box warning. If there is a black box warning, certain types of channels cannot be done, like a reminder ad. You cannot send that because black box products really require the full safety information to be produced, and you can't have safety information completely produced in a reminder ad. Prominent space would be required, and prominent space may not be available, and it may be at a high premium. ISI, when do you use the difference between ISI and SSI so that I can establish the fair balance? Medication guide, the direct to consumer, whatever channel you are thinking in terms of the direct to consumer, what can I have in a non-clinical and non-medical terms so that somebody can understand? And we have to think these things through, not just getting the approval. So congratulations at this point. Now we have the drug approved. But a good drug approval is also supposed to be monitored by other people, competitors in the industry, like the star in this Lion King is watching. When can I take over this whole kingdom? We need to actually look at that. Now you are moving into the stage 3. As part of the stage 3, the main goal is to make sure that HCP is prescribing your drug. So now you are managing multiple campaigns. Your goal, therefore, is getting multiple marketing materials approved at the same time or right after the stage 2 is starting. So execute the marketing campaign finally. That's your goal. So success lies in HCP prescribing your drug. If HCP is not prescribing, patients are not getting, and the drug is actually collecting shelf life. Nothing more than that, right? So what you have to constantly think here is what's involved in the promotion, what kind of promotion I should be looking at, what kind of additional governing regulations come into play after the approval of the drug, and what are some of the binding responsibilities for the HCP, for the HCO, for the consumers and the sales folks, everyone else who's touching the life cycle of the drug after approval. So you have to look at all these different things. As a result of that, you are creating a few other documents that you should be thinking through at this point, which is going to be annotated sales side. Which documents come from where and what kind of documents are actually annotated. The speaker slide deck, so that everybody is able to speak exactly to those words, whether it is an HCP or a promotional speaker. Convention display panels. When you are going to a conference or conventions, what kind of panels do you have with you, and that needs to be approved as well. And what kind of existing company documents can accompany your new drug approved existing reprints. Additional information about data on file that you have submitted for your stage 2. Website needs to be updated to indicate this information. And if your product is a black box product, that needs to be reflected over there. Multiple indications includes being journal ads and other media materials like videos or DVDs or CDs and all those things that needs to actually accompany these things. Everything has to be thought through much in advance. It's not going to be all right, now that the drug is ready, let's start doing these things. We need to actually start these things much in advance of the time the NDA is getting submitted so that all these things will move very fast. So just in case I forgot, there needs to be also branding guidelines. Now that you have a new drug, the new drug will have a new logo. The new logo means new emphasis, the branding guidelines associated with how the logo will look, what are the color palette, and what are the mood maps and empathy maps, and all those things that are associated with this, that also needs to be created. So all these things requires somebody with more than one type of skill set. So then we are looking at acceptable MRIs. MRI stands for medically relevant item. So when you are actually when a salesperson goes to a HCP and says, please prescribe this thing or give this particular sample and things like that, what kind of educational brochures for the HCP and patient are we creating? The leave begins. What kind of disease state awareness and brand awareness materials are we actually creating? If there are any specific anatomical models like a plaster of Paris model for heart or a wall chart needs to be reviewed and approved. You can't use anything and everything. Patient self-assessment materials like a surveys that we are asking to actually check for their own body mass index or do something before they actually eat something. What kind of tracking tools do we have? The care management and health education materials that we need to create that goes on print media or electronic media. All these things have to be thought through much in advance. So there's a lot of things that we have to actually play with. And not all of them will be applicable based upon the type of drug you are developing. And maybe more of them will apply, right? So all I'm saying over here is stage 2 sets the success for stage 3. If any one of these things are not there, we cannot develop the right promotional material. We cannot actually meet them in the right channel, and timely release of these things will not happen. If that does not happen, HCPs are not prescribing, sampling needs are properly not met, and at the end, we don't see the benefit that we originally thought. So it's not the science at that point that failed, it's the management of that science that has failed to deliver the value that we need to see. So when you talk about promotions, there are two important things. People actually mix these two things. One is called the promotion, the other one is called influence. Closely related. Promotion is basically telling go ahead and do this or buy this and things like that. We are trying to promote this. But influence is how do you make sure that any type of offer is not influencing the HCP to prescribe for reasons other than indicated for. So when you look at this, there are two important things that keeps coming up. One is going to be labeling, and the other one is called advertisement, right? Advertising. So they are equally related, somewhat similar, but not necessarily exactly the same. So when you look at labeling, anything that you are actually telling about the drug in a branded or unbranded manner, written, printed form, graphical form, any other electronic form, every one of those things that is going to be telling this is the drug, this is the indication, use it for this particular purpose. Whether somebody is getting paid to do this or not is irrelevant, right? This could be an electronic newsletter, a direct mail, business reply card, a survey, interactive voice response, electronic program or a mobile responsive program, medical alerts that we receive sometimes. All these things are part of labeling. It differs primarily from advertisement because advertisement is a subset of labeling, and the main thing is it's going to be taking a place in a commercial medium, like a media space, like a commercial TV ad. You can put everything at that particular point, so there is a limited amount of space, or a premium website where it's going to be placed. That's going to be involving some time. So there are certain rules and regulations that govern this at this point, but there are certain limitations. The primary difference is going to be whether the full prescribing information should accompany the full prescribing information should accompany labeling, but does not necessarily accompany the advertisement. That's the primary main difference. But that actually tells you what kind of materials you can develop, right? So you are moving into the stage 3. At that particular point, sometimes people will go through a specific process. When you are developing a new channel, people will say, is there a concept review needed here? Do I need to understand how this whole thing works from beginning till end? If that is, then they will have to submit a brief, and then you get an actual code, and then you will actually create the materials and submit. If it is approved, it's good. If it's not approved, is it requiring revisions to resubmit, or is it completely denied? As a result of that, you work through your process, and finally you get your final approval. As part of your final approval, there may be requirements like a printed piece. Somebody will say print it and send it to me from a printer. Printer meaning like the person who will actually print it in mass supplies. Then the color palettes will be there to make sure that the color is not getting smudged. In an electronic medium, I will basically say, you need to have this thing come to me so that I can check it on my own in a full delivery way, on a website or email or med alert or whatever it is, right? And then you move into FDA submission pocket, which is called Form 2253. And only after that is submitted, the approval is recorded. Until then, we can't say anything about the drug to anybody. Can't say anything at all. Because if you say that, then the drug could be actually taken out of the market. So there's a lot more involved over here. But who are all the people that we are involving here? So it could involve the brand manager. The brand manager is acting as the project manager, the most important person. The copy editor, who is supposed to actually think from an editorial perspective. And then there is MIS people, the medical information scientist members, who could be registered nurse, who could be a special MI person, content approval directors, looking at multiple contents and seeing how they are all correlated and interrelated. And there'll be lawyers who will be looking from a legal perspective of FDA warnings and warning letters and all those things. And then there are regulatory reviewers, how this one apply into specific states. California has a specific requirements. Some other state has some other requirements. So what are some of those specific requirements within regions? Those regulatory reviewers will look at that. So you have to take a look at all these things and then expand into the risk management in a legal structure. So there are different laws that apply over here based upon the type of promotion that you have and the type of drug that you are developing. An example is a Sunshine Act. A Sunshine Act is if somebody goes and talks about the drug and you are giving honorarium, that needs to be recorded. Because if the same HCP is going to multiple places and talking all those things, and we should be able to find out how much this person is getting paid as an honorarium, so that that person is actually prescribing this drug, outside of the indicated levels, could be applicable, right? Can Spam Act, which is supposed to be about emails. Right? So many different things come into play. Can't go into the each and every one of those details, but a lot of risk management concepts apply over here. So campaign efficiency, the post MLR or Medical Legal Regulatory Board is going to be looking at all these things. What kind of user groups are doing better for my campaign? What should I do to refine the targeting criteria? What pieces are doing better? What are not doing better? What kind of revisions I have to make at this point? And where can we control costs? Only based upon all these things, we are able to say this drug is really doing well, this drug is not doing really well. We need to have a post-force study, or we need to have something else done to make the changes that we need to have done for the consumers. So this is movie Aladdin that we talked about, and in Aladdin, Genie comes and says, Aladdin, if you want me to make you a prince, there is a lot more details involved over here in making you a prince. So you need to spell out the specifics clearly. And that's exactly what I'm telling over here in terms of drug development, right? There's a lot of detail in getting a drug approved in every stage. You need a competent project manager in different stages. The more continuity you have in the project manager throughout the stages, the more versatile that particular project will be managed throughout the entire stage. Okay. So in summary, I have covered all these things at this point, the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And I recently released a book about how project management principles apply to a lot of different areas. It's called Organized Common Sense, available in different online retailers, and I've given you the link as well here. So again, I would like to thank you everyone for this wonderful opportunity, and I hope that you got something out of this. And I will turn it over to Dr. Chitra.
I thank Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan for his excellent presentation and interactive session. And I also thank all the participants for their full support and cooperation during the entire session. Thank you, participants. Thank you, Dr. Sriram Rajagopalan, for elaborate and excellent session for participants.
Wonderful. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.